In the heart of Shinjuku, Tokyo, Japan, the lively streets had fallen into a strange stillness. What was once a bustling area filled with the sounds of life had now become silent, cloaked in an eerie shadow. Everything on the street, from cars to bicycles, had stopped. The people too seemed frozen, no longer moving with the usual energy that filled the city. One by one, people stepped out of their cars, abandoning their vehicles in the middle of the road. Traffic was piling up, but no one honked. No one shouted in frustration. Instead, they all stared in the same direction, their faces filled with disbelief and fear. Above them, an enormous gate hung in the air, so large it blocked out the sky. Its size was terrifying, reaching the height of a skyscraper. The people on the street, who had once been busy going about their lives, now stood in horror, unable to tear their eyes away from the gate. The usual sounds of the city were gone, replaced by an unsettling silence. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the entire area had been taken over by an unseen force. The once lively heart of Tokyo had become still, leaving only fear and uncertainty in its place. The air seemed thick with anticipation as hunters gathered to discuss a pressing matter. Among them were some of Japan's most powerful guilds, including the Blades, Phantoms, Invincible Kings, and Snowy Mountains. It was rare for all the major guildmasters to be called together, a clear sign that something serious was unfolding. As the hunters whispered among themselves, they couldn't help but take notice when Sugimoto Reiji entered, accompanied by Hoshino, Kumamoto, and Tawata. Sugimoto, once the vice president of the Blade Guild, had now become its leader following the devastating losses during the Jeju Island raid. 7 of their strongest S-rank hunters, including the famed Goto Ryuji, had been lost during that battle. The hunters muttered about how the Blade Guild had been weakened by Matsumoto's dangerous plans, and how their once dominant position among Japan's guilds seemed to be fading. Some even saw this as an opportunity to rise, thinking that with Goto gone, they had a chance to become Japan's strongest guild. As Sugimoto's group overheard the murmurs, they stopped in their tracks, glaring at the hunters. The tension was palpable. Hoshino's frustration was evident. Once, no one would have dared to speak so boldly in front of them, but now, with Goto gone, these hunters were becoming more confident. Tawata, too, mentioned rumors of the Phantom Guild planning to merge with the Snowy Mountain Guild, a move that would give them 4 S-rank hunters, the same number as the Blades. Sugimoto, however, dismissed the idea that merging guilds would make them the strongest. He believed that no matter how many guilds combined forces, they would still not be able to rival the Blade Guild's strength. Inside the Prime Minister's residence, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on everyone in the room. Frustrated and unable to control his temper, the Prime Minister slammed his fist on the table. He was furious, demanding to know why the Hunters Association hadn't provided any solutions yet. An S-rank gate had appeared in the heart of Tokyo, and the Prime Minister was growing increasingly worried. He wanted answers about what measures were being taken to prevent a dungeon break, knowing the catastrophic consequences that could follow. Matsumoto, trying to calm the room, explained that even S-rank hunters were not strong enough to deal with an S-rank gate. The national hunters were their best chance. However, the other guild leaders pointed out that the Prime Minister had gathered all of Japan's major guild masters together for this meeting, and it wasn't the time for obvious questions. They all knew what had happened during the Jeju Island raid, where the situation had spiraled out of control. Pessimism in the room wasn't helping. What was needed now was a clear plan of action. The suggestion to hire Thomas Andre, one of the world's strongest hunters, came up, but it was quickly dismissed, as the country lacked the funds to recruit someone of his caliber. Besides, with the sudden rise in the number of gates globally, most countries were struggling to send hunters to assist. The Prime Minister expressed doubt about how many hunters would be willing to face such a dangerous mission. The fear of tackling an S-rank gate loomed large over everyone. It was then that Sugimoto stepped in, stating with confidence that there was one hunter who would be willing to help as long as he was paid. This hunter was Yuri Orloff, a barrier specialist. Sugimoto declared his intention to hire Orloff for this mission, believing that his unique abilities could provide the key to dealing with the threat that the S-rank gate posed. As Jinwoo drove smoothly back to the guild office, his mind was occupied with thoughts of his recent progress. He reflected on how quickly his skills had improved. Now at level 101, he marveled at the fact that he had obtained the key to the Cartonin Temple at level 100, and all of his job-specific skills had leveled up with his recent advancement. His curiosity grew as he wondered what new developments awaited him at level 102. While contemplating his growth, Jinwoo's thoughts shifted to Jinho, who was working hard as Vice Guild Master. It was clear to him that Jinho's motivation was a great asset to the guild, but Jinwoo decided they needed more people on their team. He made up his mind to begin recruiting as he exited the parking lot. At that moment, he spotted a familiar figure near the building, Cha Hae-in. She too noticed Jinwoo and, to his surprise, appeared startled. Without warning, she backed away and quickly turned to leave. Jinwoo, curious and slightly competitive, immediately reacted by using Flash to sprint after her. Cha Hae-in froze when Jinwoo blocked her path. It puzzled him as to why she was avoiding him, and he questioned her intentions near his office. Embarrassed, Cha Hae-in explained quietly that she had left her car in his parking lot, reminding Jinwoo that they had used Shadow Exchange the last time they were together. Then Cha Hae-in hesitated before asking if Jinwoo was free. Inside her mind, a flurry of thoughts swirled, confusion about a photo Jinwoo had taken with Soo-hyun, jealousy and insecurity over why she, an S-rank hunter, hadn't been hired by him. Despite her internal turmoil, she managed to tell Jinwoo that she had a message for him from Min Byung-gyu regarding his powers. This unexpected revelation changed Jinwoo's expression, and he suggested they continue their conversation upstairs. Once inside the office, Hae-in was surprised by the lack of people, realizing that Jinwoo's Vice Guild Master was still out on business. Her nerves heightened at the thought of being alone with him. Jinwoo, however, remained focused and asked Hae-in how Min Byung-gyu had left a message for him. Hae-in then recounted a mysterious experience she had. She had heard a voice, and in that moment, Byung-gyu's shadow had appeared before her. His words were urgent, warning her to tell Jinwoo about the danger hidden within him. Byung-gyu described feeling as though he had been revived to serve Jinwoo, but the most unsettling part was how content he felt in that servitude. His message ended with a warning about Jinwoo's overwhelming power, hinting at a terrifying truth about his abilities. Before Byung-gyu could fully explain, a light had engulfed Hae-in, cutting off the message. His last words echoed in the emptiness, leaving Hae-in with a sense of foreboding about Jinwoo's true army. Jinwoo returned to his usual routine, raiding a dungeon alongside Jinho. As they worked, his mind wandered back to what Cha Hae-in had told him about his powers. He couldn't help but wonder if what she said was true. Regardless, Jinwoo knew that uncovering the source of his powers had now become more important than just getting stronger as a hunter. Meanwhile, Jinho was reminiscing about their past, commenting on how the dungeon reminded him of their earlier days raiding C-rank dungeons together. Jinwoo, distracted by his thoughts, reminded Jinho not to talk with his mouth full as he ate. Jinho suggested that Jinwoo could just let his soldiers handle everything while he took care of other business, given that they could move on their own, but Jinwoo knew he couldn't do that. He earned fewer experience points when he was too far away, and he couldn't always trust his soldiers to behave properly when he wasn't supervising. Just as Jinwoo was thinking about this, one of his shadow ants began devouring a magic beast, causing Jinho to react in disgust. Shifting the conversation, Jinho asked about Jinwoo's sister, Gina. Jinwoo explained that she was still recovering and needed rest. Thankfully, his most reliable shadow was watching over her, so he was confident that she was safe. Jinwoo then realized he should check up on her and used his shadow safe skill to do so. Closing his eyes, Jinwoo activated shared senses, allowing him to see what his shadows were seeing. Through the vision of Baru, who was stationed by his sister, Jinwoo observed that Gina was sound asleep, but something else caught his attention. Baru, the ant soldier, was watching a historical drama on TV, speaking in a manner that was overly formal and dramatic. Jinwoo chuckled inwardly, realizing that Baru had picked up this strange way of talking from watching too many dramas. With that settled, Jinwoo decided to check in on his mother as well. As he used his senses to observe others too, he suddenly heard the sound of water. At first, he was confused, since it wasn't raining, but when he shifted his vision, his eyes flew open in shock. He had accidentally seen Cha Hae-in in the middle of a steamy bath. Quickly pulling himself out of the shared senses, Jinwoo's surprise was noticeable, and Jinho, catching his odd reaction, asked if he had dozed off for a moment. Jinwoo shook his head, dismissing it as nothing, though he couldn't help but feel slightly embarrassed. He briefly considered taking Cha Hae-in out for dinner as an apology for the awkward situation. Jinho, ever eager to stay updated, mentioned the latest news to Jinwoo. An S-rank gate had appeared in Shinjuku, and if it wasn't cleared within 3 days, there would be a dungeon break. Jinho added that Japan had been recruiting hunters from all over the world and asked if they had contacted Jinwoo about it. Jinwoo, already aware, confirmed that he had received a call, but was still considering his options. He had more urgent matters on his mind, so the decision wasn't immediate. As he spoke, Jinwoo summoned the black key from his inventory. It appeared in his hand with a soft hiss, labeled as the key to the Cartoon Temple. In deep thought, Jinwoo reflected on the key's significance. It was an invitation from the system itself, and he couldn't help but wonder what answers awaited him in the temple. He had many questions about the system, his powers, and what it all truly meant. With only a day left before he could use the key, Jinwoo felt certain that the truth would soon be revealed. Shifting his focus back to the present, Jinwoo reminded Jinho that they still had work to do. As soon as Jinho finished his meal, he quickly followed behind Jinwoo, eager to continue their duties. Reporters from across the globe gathered in Japan, eager to catch a glimpse of Yuri Orloff, the powerful S-rank hunter from Russia. As he arrived at the airport, a massive crowd awaited him, cameras flashing and questions being thrown his way. Yuri greeted them all with a wide smile, exuding confidence as he stepped into the spotlight. His plan to block off the S-rank gate was simple, at least to him. He explained that he would use a large magic circle, pouring mana into it around the gate. It was a technique he had employed many times before, and he assured the public that whatever was inside the gate would be contained. The reporters pressed further, questioning whether he could handle such a massive task on his own, especially with the public's skepticism. Yuri calmly explained that while sustaining a barrier alone was beyond his capabilities, his magic circle could draw mana from its surroundings. By setting up large quantities of mana crystals around Tokyo, the circle would absorb their energy, growing stronger over time. It was like starting a car. Once the barrier was up, it would steadily transform into a formidable wall. Yuri confidently declared that he was going to save everyone's lives, reminding them to remember his efforts. Yuri Orloff arrived at the Hunter Association of Japan. He was known as the best support-type hunter in the world. Yuri introduced himself with confidence. After finishing his drink, he got straight to the point. He had reviewed the files sent by the Blade Guild and praised the decision to evacuate the citizens. However, he pointed out the major flaw in their plan, a lack of manpower. Sugimoto, representing the Japanese hunters, confirmed that only 6 S-rank hunters were available for the mission. Each guild had to leave 1 S-rank behind to manage other gates that had appeared across the country. The Blade Guild itself could only send 3 S-rank hunters into this critical raid, while 1 stayed behind to guard another gate. Yuri, unimpressed, smirked at the strategy. He slammed his drink down on the table, pointing out that such a plan would not be enough to protect Japan from the looming disaster. He then made his offer clear, $10 million a day to keep the gate closed. Comparing himself to Thomas Andre, who charged far more, Yuri presented his offer as a bargain, laughing as he added that saving the country for that price should be an easy decision. Sugimoto was stunned by the exorbitant demand, while Hoshino turned to Tawada, who spoke Russian, asking what exactly Yuri had said. Tawada, unsure of the full details, only confirmed that whatever it wasn't good. Yuri, with a wide grin, challenged them. They had to choose, save their country for $10 million a day, or risk everything to save a little money. Yuri Orloff's laughter echoed through the room, his confidence overwhelming. He mocked the situation, asking if the Japanese hunters really had the luxury of being picky. His arrogance grew as he implied that even begging him while licking his boots wouldn't be enough. Sugimoto, the leader of the Japanese hunters, challenged Yuri's boldness, asking if he truly believed in his abilities to make such demands. Yuri, unbothered, confidently claimed he was far better than the losers standing behind Sugimoto, dismissing the other S-rank hunters without hesitation. Hoshino and Tawada, part of the Japanese S-rank team, couldn't ignore the insult any longer. They leaped to confront him but were instantly immobilized by an invisible force, trapped in an unseen barrier. Yuri snickered at their struggle, taunting them to try and move if they could. Both Hoshino and Tawada, seasoned S-rank hunters, were shocked. They couldn't understand how Yuri had managed to completely restrict their movements despite their strength. Hoshino, bewildered, wondered how such a powerful restriction was possible, while Tawada felt as though she was chained, helpless. The entire Japanese group stood in stunned silence, witnessing Yuri's display of power. He sneered once more, offering to stop the S-rank gate for them and even let their humiliation slide without further cost. His tone was mocking, as if they should be grateful for his generosity. Sugimoto, however, maintained his composure, acknowledging Yuri's abilities. Despite the massive demand for money, he knew the government might hesitate, but trusting Yuri seemed like the only viable option left. After a moment of contemplation, Sugimoto decided to make the call to approve the deal, asking Yuri for a moment to contact the authorities. Yuri, smirking, agreed and let him proceed, and with that, the decision was set in motion. Jinwoo had tried to slip out of the apartment quietly, but when his mother called out to him, he stopped and sat back down for a moment. His mother, Kyung-hee, glanced at him over her shoulder, concerned. She asked if there was anything she needed to worry about, and Jinwoo quickly reassured her, telling her he just had an appointment. With that, he left the apartment, promising to return soon. As he stepped outside, Jinwoo summoned the black key. The time had finally come. A notification popped up, revealing the location where the key could be used. To his surprise, it was near his sister Gina's school. At the school gate, a couple of Hunter Association employees were discussing the situation. They talked about how fortunate it was that the school was closed, as they wouldn't be able to control the students if they were present. They mentioned that a gate had opened at the same spot again. Jinwoo, cloaked in stealth, quietly approached unnoticed. As an employee stepped in to stop him, he calmly lowered his hood, revealing his presence with a quiet yet commanding gesture. The female employee, one he recognized from a previous encounter at a B-rank gate, was surprised when she saw him. Jinwoo calmly asked how long the gate had been open, and she informed him it had been 3 days. Jinwoo realized that the system had revealed the location of the gate, but didn't specify when it would appear. 3 days had already passed, and Jinwoo immediately knew that the situation was dangerous. Despite the gate being classified as C-rank, Jinwoo sensed something was wrong. He asked the female employee if any hunters had already entered the gate, and she confirmed that an assault squad had gone in 2 hours ago. Without hesitation, Jinwoo told her to call them back immediately, warning her that the entire squad was in danger and would die if they stayed inside. The employee, confused and alarmed, questioned Jinwoo's urgency, pointing out that the gate was only C rank. But Jinwoo, focused on saving the hunters, walked straight toward the gate, insisting that there was no time to explain. He would bring the assault squad back himself, leaving the bewildered employee behind as he disappeared inside the gate. Inside the dungeon, the carcasses of magic beasts were scattered across the floor, a grim reminder of the battles fought by the strike squad. The group had gathered in front of what appeared to be the boss room, but something was off. The door, despite their efforts, wouldn't open. Frustrated and confused, the hunters discussed their options. Realizing that even their magic couldn't move the door, they were determined to press on, unwilling to turn back after coming so far. As the strike squad debated their next move, a figure emerged from the shadows. Jinwoo. His sudden appearance startled the group, who had no idea who he was at first. Jinwoo mentioned that he was the survivor of the double dungeon. One of them recognized him as Sung Jinwoo, the famous S-rank hunter. Their surprise quickly turned to awe and fear as Jinwoo warned them that they were in a dangerous place. He advised them to leave immediately as the situation was more perilous than they realized. Ignoring their murmurs of disbelief, Jinwoo stepped forward, examining the door that blocked their path. It wasn't opening and something felt off. As he inspected it further, a notification appeared, informing him that the gate to the Kartanon Temple was locked and required the key to open. Realizing this dungeon was different from his past encounters, Jinwoo understood why he needed the key this time. Jinwoo used the key and the door creaked open, revealing the way forward. The strike squad was stunned, having tried everything to open the door themselves without success. They couldn't believe how easily Jinwoo had accomplished what they couldn't. However, despite their awe, some members of the strike squad were still defiant. They reminded Jinwoo that the Dragon Guild had purchased the raid permit for this dungeon, and although he was an S rank, he had no right to tell them what to do. Jinwoo, though understanding their position, couldn't ignore the danger that lay ahead. He knew that staying here would be a grave mistake for the squad, but he also realized that convincing them otherwise would not be easy. Jinwoo stood before the strike squad, his gaze calm and unwavering. He told them he wouldn't stop anyone from entering the gate, giving them the choice to proceed if they wished. One of the strike squad members, determined to prove his courage, stepped forward and entered the room. As soon as he crossed the threshold, a notification appeared, though only Jinwoo could see it. The system warned that access had been denied to the individual who didn't possess the key to the temple. In the next moment, a massive sword swung down from above, aiming directly at the squad member's head, but Jinwoo acted swiftly, pulling the man out of harm's way just in time. The force of the blow crushed the stone tile where he had been standing. The squad member screamed in terror as the monstrous doorkeepers, guardians of the temple, lunged at him. Without hesitation, Jinwoo threw the terrified man out of the room, saving him from certain death. He warned the rest of the strike squad, explaining that all the monsters in this dungeon were as dangerous as the ones they had just witnessed. He urged them to leave the dungeon immediately and contact the hunters Hunter Association to report that a double dungeon had appeared. Once the squad stood in silence, Jinwoo turned back to the gate. With no one else around, he stepped through the door alone. A notification appeared, confirming that the one who possessed the key had entered. As Jinwoo moved deeper into the dungeon, the door behind him closed with a heavy thud, sealing him inside. The room Jinwoo stepped into was massive, its vastness almost overwhelming. Towering statues lined the walls, each one carved with intricate detail, standing in silent vigil. At the far end of the hall, the largest statue sat, looming ominously over the space. Everything looked just as he remembered from before, the eerie stillness of the room pulling at his memories. His heart raced as he stood in the room once again, but something was different this time. Jinwoo himself had changed. His newfound strength and evolution as a hunter allowed him to see beyond what he once could. These statues, once menacing, now revealed their true nature to him. They weren't living creatures or magic beasts as they had seemed. Instead, they were mere puppets, connected to something far more powerful. Jinwoo's sharp senses picked up on one presence in the room, something that hid its mana so expertly it would have been impossible to detect, if not for the dark, sinister aura it exuded. Slowly, Jinwoo made his way toward one specific statue. This one was different from the rest, and as he approached it, he spoke aloud. "It was you." The statue gave no response, remaining as still and silent as the others. His frustration grew. Why wasn't it answering? Jinwoo's gaze shifted to the stone tablet that the statue clutched tightly in its hand. This particular figure was the only one armed with such an object. Then in a moment that sent a chill down Jinwoo's spine, the statue with wings smiled. Its glowing red eyes flickered to life and a voice filled the room. "At last you have arrived." A twisted sense of satisfaction in its tone. The time for answers had finally come. Across Japan, people were glued to their screens, eager to watch Yuri Orloff's interview. He had boldly promised to protect the nation from the looming threat of an S-rank gate. In Korea, President Go Gun-hee of the Hunters Association also followed the news closely, his expression filled with uncertainty. He wasn't entirely convinced of Yuri's ability to seal off such a powerful gate, but he knew one thing for sure. If Yuri failed, the consequences would be devastating. Go Gun-hee turned to his assistant, Woo Jim-chul, and inquired about Hunter Sung Jinwoo's recent activities. Jim-chul handed over a list, explaining that Jinwoo had been busy raiding gates in Seoul. The Ajin Guild, Jinwoo's own guild, had requested entry permits for all the gates marked on the list. Gun-hee raised an eyebrow, finding it amusing that a single guild, especially a newly formed one, was targeting so many gates usually managed by larger guilds like the White Tiger, Hunters, and Fiend. Jim-chul confirmed that there might be some friction because of this, but Gun-hee only chuckled at the thought. The power of a one-man guild as strong as a major guild was nothing short of fascinating. Jim-chul then mentioned that the Ajin Guild had also requested to handle nearby gates for the next week, though the reasons were unspecified. Gun-hee, not seeing any issue, agreed without much hesitation. Just as they were finishing their discussion, Jim-chul's phone buzzed with a call. He asked for permission to step aside, which Gun-hee granted, as the chairman had an appointment to attend. Jim-chul answered the call, his expression turning serious as he listened to the report on the other end. The caller informed him about a gate that had recently appeared at the school where a group of orcs had previously attacked. Even more alarming was the discovery of a double dungeon inside the gate. The news left Jim-chul stunned, especially when he heard the final detail. Hunter Sung Jinwoo had entered the double dungeon. Jinwoo stood in front of the statue with 6 wings, resembling an angel, holding a stone slate. The wind howled around them, creating an eerie atmosphere. Suddenly, the stone slate began to crack, and in a violent motion, the statue smashed it into pieces. Debris flew past Jinwoo as the remnants crumbled around him. The statue spoke, acknowledging that Jinwoo had finally arrived. He pondered maybe the commandments inscribed on it might never have mattered at all. Jinwoo narrowed his eyes, questioning if destroying the slab was acceptable. The statue, however, corrected him, claiming that while the commandments once held significance, they no longer did. Jinwoo demanded to know if he was the one who had summoned him here. With an evil grin, the statue confirmed that it was indeed the one who had called him to this place. But when Jinwoo asked if the statue was a monster, the response was dismissive. The statue told him he was asking the wrong questions and clapped, directing Jinwoo's focus towards something else. Instead of asking about the statue's identity, Jinwoo should have been questioning his own. This marked the beginning of Jinwoo's final test. As the sound of stone cracking filled the room, the other statues turned their heads toward Jinwoo. They stepped off their pedestals, weapons raised, ready to engage him. Jinwoo, ever prepared, summoned his shadow soldiers to fight, but before they could act, the statue snapped its fingers, stopping them. This was a test for Jinwoo alone. No outside help was allowed. A notification appeared, restricting Jinwoo's use of job-exclusive skills, potions, and rewards gained from leveling up or completing quests. Everything that could aid him in the fight was disabled. The statue emphasized that it was only interested in assessing Jinwoo's abilities, not those of his soldiers. Though Jinwoo frowned at each restriction, he didn't have time to dwell on the sudden limitations. He realized that all the advantages he had relied on were now useless. There was no escape until the test was completed, and Jinwoo had to face the challenge ahead without his usual arsenal. The stone figures moved steadily toward Jinwoo, their heavy steps echoing through the room. Jinwoo observed each one carefully, recalling how powerful they were despite being mere puppets. These figures had nearly killed him before, but now things were different. One of the figures swung its massive sword at him, cutting through the air with a sharp sound. Jinwoo, realizing he still had access to his inventory, decided to rely solely on his strength to defeat them. As the sword came down, Jinwoo blocked it with his bare hands, catching it effortlessly. In a swift motion, he grabbed the blade with his left hand and, using his right, snapped it in two. Without hesitation, Jinwoo gripped the broken piece of the sword and hurled it with incredible force. The shard flew straight at the stone figure, piercing through its temple with precision. Not stopping for a moment, Jinwoo dashed forward. The stone figure, now damaged, tried to pull the broken piece from its head, but Jinwoo was faster. He leapt into the air and kicked the shard deeper into the figure's skull with his toes, causing it to shatter completely. Another stone figure stepped forward, swinging its massive axe at Jinwoo with fierce power. Jinwoo tightened his grip on his daggers, ready for the attack. With a swift motion, he blocked the incoming strike, the sound of metal clashing reverberating through the air. He quickly countered, slashing at the axe, and in an instant, the head of the weapon split in two. Jinwoo leaped into the air, the stone figure watching him closely as he descended. As he came down, Jinwoo dragged his daggers across the figure's head, crushing its skull with precise, devastating force. His gaze locked on the next target. Another figure approached, this time wielding a bow. It unleashed an arrow at Jinwoo with incredible speed. Jinwoo dodged effortlessly, the arrow whizzing past him. The figure quickly fired again, but Jinwoo reacted swiftly, slicing the arrow in two mid-air with his daggers. Without missing a beat, Jinwoo jumped toward the broken arrow pieces, his movements a blur. He kicked one of the arrow halves with brutal force, sending it flying back like a missile. The makeshift projectile struck the stone figure with unrelenting power, causing its head to explode into fragments. The figure collapsed, and Jinwoo's eyes burned with determination as he continued to face the relentless onslaught of statues. He parried, blocked, and repelled every attack with ease, cutting down the statues one by one. Jinwoo's heart surged with anticipation. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the challenge that made him feel alive. His movements were fluid, precise, and unstoppable as he wielded the demon monarch's daggers, slicing through the stone figures as if they were nothing more than brittle rock. His body, mind, and weapons had become one, turning him into an unstoppable force. With each strike, the statues crumbled. The angelic statue, the one observing from the far end of the room, trembled in delight. It watched Jinwoo with a sinister satisfaction, marveling at the incredible growth he had achieved as a mere human. Jinwoo continued to fight, his daggers moving swiftly as he blocked and struck back against the relentless attacks of the stone statues. Their movements, which once seemed like teleportation, were now clear to him. Each step, each swing, he could follow them all with precision. The sound of his blades clashing with the stone echoed through the chamber. Despite their overwhelming strength, Jinwoo remained confident. Every statue he faced was powerful, but he had grown stronger. A fierce determination burned within him as he pressed on, cutting down each enemy one by one. His focus was unwavering. As Jinwoo fought, the angelic statue, watching from a distance, seemed pleased. Its smile grew wider, confirming that it had made the right choice. It marveled at the impressive growth Jinwoo had shown, but it wasn't ready to end the test just yet. Suddenly, a deep rumble filled the room, drawing Jinwoo's attention. His gaze shifted to the massive colossus seated on a throne at the far end of the hall. The giant figure, which had been still until now, slowly opened its glowing red eyes. It had been waiting for this moment. Gripping the armrests of its throne, the colossus rose to its feet, the sound of stone grinding against stone echoing through the chamber. The sheer size of the colossus was enough to send a wave of unease through the air. With each step it took, the ground trembled beneath beneath it. The entire lair seemed to shake as the enormous figure moved forward, its presence overwhelming. With a sinister grin, the angelic statue watched the colossal figure approach. In a voice filled with anticipation, it declared, "Now the time has come to worship the god." Jinwoo surged forward with blinding speed, his movements a blur as he decapitated yet another stone figure with a swift slice from his daggers. The stone soldiers seemed endless, their numbers constantly replenishing no matter how many he cut down. Each step he took back was calculated, but the figures were closing in, arms outstretched, ready to grab him at any moment. But Jinwoo's sharp instincts told him there was something far more dangerous looming. He quickly looked up, his gaze locking onto the massive colossus that sat towering above the battlefield. Its once dormant eyes were now glowing with an intense red light, and Jinwoo realized in a split second what was coming, a deadly blast of heat vision. Dropping the dagger from his left hand, Jinwoo quickly extended his arm toward the advancing stone figures. In one fluid motion, he activated his skill, Commander's Touch. The power surged through him, and 5 of the stone soldiers were immediately pulled together, their forms crushed and bound in midair. As they were forced together by his will, the Colossus unleashed its deadly attack. A brilliant red laser erupted from the giant's eyes, cutting through the air with a deafening sizzle. The beam struck the group of chained statues with a force that shook the entire temple. Jinwoo's improvised shield absorbed the blast, but the power of the laser was overwhelming. The chained statues were vaporized in a matter of seconds, reduced to molten rubble, but the delay had been enough. The moment bought Jinwoo the precious time he needed to leap back, avoiding the brunt of the attack. As the heat and dust cleared, Jinwoo's gaze flicked to a new notification that flashed before him. Commander's Touch has been upgraded to its final form, Dominator's Authority. Jinwoo knew without a doubt that even at his current level, a direct hit from that beam would spell his end, and it was clear that he needed to take it down first if he had any hope of surviving this test. The eerie red light in the Colossus's eyes continued to grow, signaling that another attack was imminent. Jinwoo tapped his foot on the ground, and with a sharp crack, he launched himself forward, his body becoming a blur of motion as he darted toward the colossal statue. The towering figure watched him approach, slowly raising its massive foot and slamming it down in an attempt to crush him, but Jinwoo's speed was beyond what the Colossus could follow. The foot missed its target entirely as Jinwoo weaved out of its path effortlessly. Now moving so fast that the giant could barely track him, Jinwoo arrived at its feet and crouched low, focusing all his energy into his legs. He knew he had only one chance to pull this off. The glowing red eyes of the Colossus began to lock onto him again, signaling another deadly laser beam was imminent. Jinwoo propelled himself upward with all his might. His body shot into the air like a rocket, and as he ascended, he could feel the heat from the Colossus's glowing eyes, its deadly gaze tracking him once again. Jinwoo quickly formulated a plan. If he combined his speed with his recently upgraded skill, Dominator's Authority, he could head straight for the Colossus's blind spot. He extended his hand and activated the skill, focusing its power on the Colossus's shoulder. But instead of pulling the massive statue toward him, Jinwoo used the force to drag himself closer to the giant. A red beam shot from the Colossus's eyes, striking the spot where Jinwoo had been just a moment before. The heat from the blast crackled in the air, rumbling across the battlefield. Jinwoo could feel the intense gravitational pull from his skill as he was yanked toward the Colossus. The upgrade to Dominator's Authority had made a huge difference, giving him control over even the largest of foes. Jinwoo gripped his daggers with intense focus, feeling the weight of the battle ahead. Activating the skill mutilation, he surged forward, moving with lightning speed. Racing across the massive shoulder of the stone giant, he struck with the demon monarch's dagger. The air shimmered with the trail of his attacks, and a series of bright silver lines lit up the Colossus's face. But despite his speed and precision, the strikes barely pierced the surface. Each blow only left shallow scratches. No matter how many times he stabbed, the damage was insignificant, mere flesh wounds against the seemingly impenetrable stone. The weapon, known for slicing through almost anything, was struggling. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed in response. With renewed determination, Jinwoo decided on a different tactic. If his blade couldn't penetrate the stone, then he would use pure force. His eyes locked onto a small crevice in the statue's face, a possible weak spot. Without hesitation, Jinwoo leaped onto the statue, grabbing onto its face like a rock climber. His grip was firm, his focus sharper than ever. Drawing in a deep breath, he funneled a tremendous amount of mana into his arms. His muscles swelled with power, veins bulging as he poured his strength into his fist. With a swift, deadly swing, Jinwoo Jinwoo unleashed his first punch. The impact was immense. The sound of his punch echoed like a thunderclap throughout the lair, the force sending shockwaves through the stone. The massive figure seemed to falter slightly, its angelic face registering a trace of surprise. The angelic figure seemed surprised by Jinwoo's approach, never expecting such a direct and forceful attack on its creation. Jinwoo continued his relentless onslaught, throwing punch after punch at the towering colossus. Each strike landed with brutal force, echoing through the lair with loud, bone-shaking sounds. Each punch landed with force, creating a relentless rhythm that echoed through the space. Jinwoo, consumed by fury, was determined to prove the power of level 103. Every strike sent cracks splintering across the giant stone face, the impact growing more devastating with every blow. The damage began to show as a large fissure appeared, slowly expanding like a spiderweb across the surface. With a final, powerful strike, the Colossus couldn't hold itself up any longer. The enormous statue dropped to the floor, the sound of its collapse resounding like thunder ripping through the skies. As the ground trembled beneath the weight of the fallen statue, a thick cloud of dust rose into the air, filling the space. As the dust settled, Jinwoo emerged unscathed, standing tall amidst the chaos. But the battle wasn't over. The other stone statues, seizing the opportunity, launched themselves at him. They moved quickly, closing in on Jinwoo from all sides, ready to strike. However, before they could make their attack, Jinwoo acted. He raised his hand and activated Dominator's authority. In an instant, the surrounding statues were immobilized. With a sharp, forceful motion, their heads slammed into the ground, their bodies no longer moving. The ground rumbled briefly before falling silent. Jinwoo, feeling the surge of power from the intense battle, clenched his fist. He could sense his growth from the fight, realizing that he had become even more powerful. The slow, deliberate sound of clapping echoed through the chamber, drawing Jinwoo's sharp gaze toward its source. The angelic statue stood there, and Jinwoo's eyes narrowed, his patience wearing thin. Without wasting time, Jinwoo demanded answers. But instead of clarity, the angel statue responded with a cold, hollow laugh that seemed to come from everywhere. It was clear the statue wasn't finished with him. As its lips moved, the voice that followed didn't match, emanating from the very air around him. A sudden notification popped up, freezing Jinwoo's attention. The urgent quest flashed before his eyes, carrying an ominous message that chilled him to the core. The angel's voice then cut through the silence once again, declaring itself as Jinwoo's final test, the last challenge between him and the truth. Time became his enemy, with only 10 minutes standing between survival and death. His heart would stop if he failed to overcome the threat. As seconds ticked away, Jinwoo's frustration grew, but he demanded to know who or what the angel statue truly was. In response, another notification appeared, reminding him that his question had already been dismissed. But as if offering a final revelation, the statue revealed its true identity. It was the architect of the system itself. The surveillance team arrived at the location, quickly organizing themselves under the guidance of a female employee. She directed everyone into position as the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Jinchul, the leader of the group, had managed to assemble 7 elite hunters from the association, hunters that were the best he could gather at the moment. However, deep down, Jinchul knew that even this team wouldn't be enough to assist Sung Jinwoo. His preparations were more for the worst-case scenario rather than a real solution. His eyes remained fixed on the gate in front of them. There was something unnatural about the energy pouring out of it. The sheer amount of magic power felt overwhelming, warping the very space around the gate. Jinchul felt a wave of nausea, his instincts warning him of the danger. He took a cautious step back, the oppressive mana pressing against him like a storm. A deep sense of dread settled in as Jinchul muttered to himself, feeling the intense aura filling the air. It wasn't just any ordinary gate, this was something far more terrifying. The storm of mana was bone-chilling, unlike anything he'd felt before. Turning to his team, Jinchul asked if anyone else could sense the same overwhelming presence. He needed to confirm if it was just his instincts, or if they were all facing something truly dangerous. One of his subordinates confirmed the growing pressure, noting that the Hunters Guild was on standby nearby, ready for a potential raid. When asked about the availability of their top hunters, the subordinate informed Jinchul that both Choi Jong-in and Cha Hae-yin, the S-rank hunters from the guild, had agreed to participate if needed. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, Jinchul ordered his team to send an emergency request for cooperation to the Hunters Guild. It was clear that they would need all the help they could get to face the looming threat. As the final test commenced, Jinwoo found himself standing face to face with the architect, the mastermind behind every challenge he had endured. The air between them crackled with tension, heavy with the anticipation of the battle that was about to erupt. Without warning, the ground beneath them trembled and the architect launched forward with blinding speed. There was no time to react. Jinwoo attempted to rush past, but the architect moved with frightening precision, intercepting him before he could escape. In an instant, powerful fists flew at Jinwoo, as fast as lightning and too close to avoid. Relying on instinct, Jinwoo raised his arms to block the oncoming attack. Though it prevented the full force from landing, the blow was still devastating. With a thunderous bam, the architect's punch sent Jinwoo hurtling across the chamber. He crashed onto the ground, the impact rattling his bones as pieces of rubble scattered around him. The force of the attack shook the surroundings, leaving the ground cracked beneath him. Jinwoo's body ached from the brutal impact, pain surging through him, but the architect showed no mercy. Before Jinwoo could regain his composure, the towering figure loomed over him, ready to strike again. A split second before the next blow landed, Jinwoo tilted his head, narrowly avoiding the crushing fist. The architect's punch collided with the wall behind him, leaving a deep, gaping hole where Jinwoo had been moments before. Fists came at Jinwoo with terrifying speed, each strike aiming to end him, but Jinwoo moved swiftly, dodging every blow with precision, his body a blur of motion. The architect, relentless in its assault, had Jinwoo pinned to the ground. It unleashed a barrage of punches, each one strong enough to kill a high-ranking hunter in an instant. The force behind the attacks was overwhelming, the sound of impact echoing throughout the chamber as the architect grinned, relishing the onslaught. But despite the relentless attack, Jinwoo held his ground. His hands moved with blinding speed, blocking and deflecting the hits. It was an incredible feat, 8 fists raining down on him, yet Jinwoo, using only his 2, managed to defend against everyone. The architect, surprised, could only see the afterimages of Jinwoo's movements, realizing that its punches were no longer landing. A sudden, powerful blow from the architect crashed into Jinwoo's jaw, the impact brutal. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead as the pain coursed through him, but Jinwoo remained resolute. He had reached his breaking point. Gathering his strength, he crouched low, ready to strike back. Jinwoo threw a punch with all the force he could muster. The impact was explosive, sending the architect flying across the lair, tumbling from the sheer power behind the attack. But the architect quickly recovered, its feet firmly planted on the ground once again, a wide grin spreading across its face. For the first time in its long existence, the architect found itself amused. Never had it considered a human could become a worthy opponent, but now it stood facing Jinwoo, recognizing the true challenge before it. Blood trickled into Jinwoo's eye, blurring his vision. Despite the pain and the haze in his sight, his thoughts were clear. The architect had summoned him here as soon as he reached level 101, likely believing Jinwoo to be no match for him, but Jinwoo knew he had the strength to take him down. Determined, Jinwoo focused on the architect, seeking answers. He wondered why the architect had created the system, and more importantly, why Jinwoo had been chosen as its player. The architect, amused by Jinwoo's sudden curiosity, asked why he wanted to know now. With a smirk, he mused, "I see. You think maybe you won't get the answers if you kill me." To the architect, the thought of defeat was nothing more than an entertaining impossibility. Realizing that close combat put him at a disadvantage, Jinwoo quickly increased the distance between himself and the architect. Activating his skill, Dominator's Authority, he prepared for a long-distance battle. The architect, however, was unfazed. He extended his arms, revealing that he could use the same skill as Jinwoo. Their forces collided in midair, creating a massive gravitational pull that scorched the earth and shattered the ground beneath them. Jinwoo quickly realized the grim truth. If the architect could use the same abilities, his long-distance attacks would be ineffective. The architect, now standing with all 8 of his arms outstretched, declared that it didn't matter whether Jinwoo killed him or not. Weapons scattered on the ground began to tremble, vibrating with an ominous energy. The air around them buzzed as the weapons floated upwards, drawn toward the architect. Each of his 8 hands gripped a different weapon controlled by the skilled Dominator's Authority. As Jinwoo tightened his grip on his daggers, he sought more answers. How had the architect designed such a powerful system, and how was it possible that he had gained such immense abilities? The architect, now holding all the weapons, explained that he had not chosen Jinwoo at all. In fact, he had been opposed to the idea. He was merely the architect and moderator of the player breeding system, a flawless design he had created, everything predetermined from the very start. Jinwoo realized that less than 7 minutes remained. Time was running out, and he knew he had no choice but to face the architect head on. The architect, sensing the urgency as well, prepared to use his full strength for the remaining time. In a flash, the architect leaped high into the air, landing right in front of Jinwoo with enough force to crack the stone tiles beneath them. The impact sent pieces of rubble flying in all directions. Armed with 8 different weapons, ranging from a sword, spear, and blade to an axe and hammer, the architect's attacks rushed toward Jinwoo like they were alive, each one aimed with deadly precision. The relentless barrage of attacks filled the air with deafening sounds as the weapons clashed with the ground and walls around Jinwoo. He regulated his breathing, keeping his focus sharp as he locked eyes with the architect. Despite the chaos, something inside Jinwoo shifted. His senses were growing sharper with every passing second. He could feel it. His perception had gone beyond its limit. Even with one eye impaired by the blood that blurred his vision, Jinwoo could track the movements of the architect's weapons. They came at him with incredible speed, but he moved his body with such precision that the architect's sword missed him by the smallest of margins. His enhanced awareness allowed him to see the attacks before they landed, and he narrowly evaded each strike while delivering counterattacks of his own. The architect was taken aback. He had unleashed his full force, yet Jinwoo was not only blocking the blows, but also striking back with increasing speed. With every passing moment, Jinwoo was getting faster, his attacks more precise. As the intense battle continued, the architect was left in disbelief at Jinwoo's overwhelming power. As Jinwoo's blade sliced through the air, severing one of the architect's arms, his detached limb flew across the room. Despite the fact that he was inside a fake body, the architect stumbled backward, groaning in pain. He couldn't believe that a mere human was capable of causing him such harm. His eyes narrowed, realizing that within Jinwoo there was a small fraction of something far greater, something that allowed him to stand on equal footing in this battle. But Jinwoo remained calm and focused, his gaze unwavering as he prepared for the next move. The architect, filled with anger and disbelief, bellowed with rage. He couldn't comprehend how a human could defy him in such a way. In a desperate act, the architect called upon the other statues to attack. Even those with shattered heads and broken bodies began to rise, ready to obey his command. As the ground trembled beneath their feet, Jinwoo quickly assessed the positions of the statues. Without showing any signs of panic, he charged at the architect once more, determined to finish the fight. Time was running out, and with the clock ticking down to just over 3 minutes, every second mattered. Jinwoo stretched out his hand, activating his skill, Dominator's Authority. With a powerful blast, a wave of enemies was sent flying backward as if struck by an explosion. Jinwoo dashed forward at an incredible speed, gripping his dagger tightly as he blurred through the battlefield. Just as he was about to press his advantage, the colossal statue slammed its massive fist toward him. In a swift movement, Jinwoo leaped to the side, narrowly avoiding the devastating blow. The giant's fist crashed down with such force that it destroyed dozens of the surrounding statues. Jinwoo kept his momentum, running in a wide circle to evade the remaining enemies while closing the distance between him and the architect. The architect's hands moved with lightning speed, each motion swift and precise. At the center of it all stood Jinwoo, calm yet fierce in the chaos surrounding him. The battle was brutal, but Jinwoo's relentless attacks began to take their toll. With a powerful slash, Jinwoo severed another arm from the architect, causing the figure to stagger back. As the architect raised his sword, Jinwoo met the strike head on and slashed his blade with explosive force. Just as Jinwoo was about to deliver the final blow, a sudden impact struck him from behind. A shield, wielded by one of the statues, slammed into his back with brutal force. Jinwoo winced, his body momentarily jarred from the surprise attack. Quickly shifting his gaze, Jinwoo spotted the statue responsible, its shield raised, ready to strike again. He recognized this one, the same statue that had attacked him earlier. A surge of anger washed over Jinwoo as he remembered the grudge he held against it. Without hesitation, Jinwoo leaped into the air and descended with precision, his elbow powered by mana. The impact of his strike crushed the statue's head, turning it to dust in an instant, but Jinwoo didn't stop there. Fueled by rage, he rushed back toward the architect, who could only watch in shock as Jinwoo closed in on him. The architect's eyes widened, his jaw dropping in disbelief at the speed and ferocity of Jinwoo's assault. In one swift motion, Jinwoo slashed off 2 more of the architect's arms. With a final, powerful slam, Jinwoo brought the architect down to the ground with brute force. The room shook with the impact as the architect crashed into the floor, dust and debris swirling in the air. As the dust settled, Jinwoo slowly walked toward the fallen architect. With his dagger in hand, he pressed the blade against the architect's neck, signaling the end of their battle. The architect admitted his defeat, announcing that the test had come to an end. As he spoke, the timer that had been counting down abruptly stopped, the battle finally reaching its conclusion. The architect pointed his finger toward Jinwoo. He told Jinwoo that the answer he had been searching for was within him. Jinwoo was momentarily confused. How could the answer be within him? Suddenly, a notification appeared before Jinwoo's eyes, retrieving data from storage. A simple question followed, asking if Jinwoo wanted to accept the retrieval. The architect locked eyes with him, emphasizing that the choice was Jinwoo's to make. Jinwoo, deep in thought, pondered the data supposedly stored in his memory. Although countless possibilities ran through his mind, he had already made his decision. With a firm resolve, Jinwoo answered the system's prompt with a simple yes. Instantly, darkness enveloped him. He felt weightless, drifting through an endless void. Then the system's voice echoed around him. You have successfully retrieved the data. Suddenly, Jinwoo found himself traveling at breakneck speed through what seemed like a tunnel of darkness. He shot through it, the momentum carrying him until he was hurled into a bright, blinding light. As his eyes adjusted, he gasped at the sight unfolding beneath him. Below him stretched an endless army of magical beasts, lined up in countless rows as far as his eyes could see. The sheer size of the army was staggering. Jinwoo's mind raced as he processed the overwhelming scene in front of him. What were these creatures waiting for? Jinwoo soon realized they were all looking at something. He followed their gaze, and then he saw it. Suspended high in the sky was a massive black shape. At first, it seemed like a dark lake, but it wasn't water. It was a gate, a colossal one, blocking out the strange purple sky above. The sight left Jinwoo in disbelief. This landscape, an arid, brownish-red wasteland with bizarre rock formations, couldn't possibly be Earth. The sky's unusual hue and the hordes of terrifying monsters confirmed it. He wasn't on his home planet. The army was made up of creatures like high orcs, ice elves, goblins, and even giants. Their power was evident from just a glance, and the thought of them escaping through the gate and invading Earth was horrifying. If they succeeded, humanity wouldn't stand a chance against the onslaught. Jinwoo couldn't shake the feeling of dread as he took in the enormity of what he was witnessing. The scene before Jinwoo took a sudden and dramatic turn. The gate hovering in the sky like a dark void began to crack. With a sharp sound, it shattered open. From the broken gate, silver-armored winged soldiers poured out, filling the sky like a swarm of angry bees disturbed from their hive. They were numerous, their shining armor glinting as they occupied the heavens, just as the magic beasts covered the land below. The sight was breathtaking, almost surreal. Jinwoo was left in awe at the grand spectacle. A battle of epic proportions was about to unfold. This was war. The soldiers in the sky blew majestic horns that echoed across the battlefield. The sound signaled the beginning of the clash. The magic beasts rallied, preparing to fight against the oncoming force from the heavens. The two sides collided violently. Clashing weapons, shattered armor, and blood-curdling screams filled the air. The brownish-red land quickly became stained with the blood of both sides. However, it didn't take long for Jinwoo to realize who held the advantage. The silver soldiers, with their precision and overwhelming strength, were far superior. They easily decapitated magic beasts, the same creatures that could tear apart high-ranking hunters with ease. The tide of battle quickly turned in favor of the silver-armored warriors, and it became clear that the annihilation of the magic beasts was inevitable. But then, just as victory seemed certain for the soldiers, something unexpected happened. One by one, the silver soldiers froze in place, ceasing their assault. A massive shadow began to spread across the battlefield, creeping across the brownish-red terrain. It flowed like water beneath the bodies of the fallen, covering the blood-soaked ground below. As the shadow passed under the corpses of the dead, chilling screams echoed from nowhere. Jinwoo couldn't see where the cries were coming from, but the effect was eerily familiar. The ability to control shadows in such a way reminded him of a power he knew well, Monarch's domain. A towering knight, clad in black armor from head to toe, appeared on the battlefield. A dark, menacing aura surrounded both the knight and the horse he rode, radiating an overwhelming sense of power. Jinwoo didn't need to be told who this was. There was only one being this knight could be: the Shadow Monarch. With a commanding presence, the Shadow Monarch turned his gaze toward the silver soldiers in the sky. His voice, deep and powerful, broke through the silence that had momentarily fallen over the battlefield. Arise. That single word rippled through the battlefield with terrifying speed, and the effect was immediate. The shadows stirred and moved, dark waves rolling across the blood-soaked ground. The battlefield, once painted red with blood, was now consumed by a sea of black. The Shadow soldiers, once lifeless, came to life. Their eyes glowed dark darkly as they turned toward the Silver Soldiers, their cries filling the air, an eerie mixture of roars and screams that echoed across the battlefield. The fallen monsters had sacrificed their lives, but now they rose again, brought back to fight once more. Death had not been the end for them. Their blood had thickened and darkened, granting them new strength. Jinwoo, watching the spectacle, was in awe. The Shadow Monarch could summon an endless army of shadow soldiers, an ability far beyond anything Jinwoo could currently manage. The power displayed was overwhelming, a true testament to the Shadow Monarch's terrifying strength. The resurrected monsters charged at the Silver Soldiers without fear, their once lifeless bodies now filled with dark energy. The two armies, black and silver, clashed once more, their fierce battle shaking the earth. Explosions echoed, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of their conflict. What had been a one-sided massacre was now a brutal, evenly matched war, all because of the arrival of a single, overwhelmingly powerful figure. The moment the Shadow Monarch himself entered the battle, it was as if the scale had tipped completely in his favor. Riding his black horse, the Shadow Monarch charged into the fray, cutting down thousands of enemies with every swing of his sword. Each fallen enemy became a new shadow soldier, rising to fight under his command. With just a wave of his hand, the soldiers of the sky lost their wings, tumbling from the heavens to their doom. Jinwoo recognized the skill instantly. The monarch was using Dominator's authority, the same power Jinwoo himself wielded. Wherever the Shadow Monarch went, destruction followed, and the battlefield was left in ruins. Victory seemed inevitable for the Shadow Monarch and his ever-growing army of monsters. But then, something changed. Jinwoo's eyes widened in shock as an eerie wind swept across the battlefield. An intense aura followed, sending chills down his spine. The Shadow Monarch too sensed it and turned, despite having the enemy before him. Two enormous gates, as massive as the ones floating above, suddenly appeared behind the Shadow Monarch. From these gates emerged two distinct groups of magic beasts. The first group consisted of knights and soldiers, carrying the banners of noble clans as they charged into battle. Jinwoo immediately recognized the crests on those standards: Ricardo, Pathos, Loken, Indras, and even the Radiru clan, to which Asil belonged. These were the noble clans from the Demon's Castle, a fearsome and powerful force. The second group was composed of animal-type magic beasts, led by a colossal wolf as tall as a mountain. The mighty beast stepped out of the gate with an earth-shaking stomp, its growl echoing across the battlefield. Behind it, a horde of savage beasts followed, their roars blending into a monstrous symphony of sound. With the powerful animal-type beasts and the demon clan surrounding the Shadow Monarch and his soldiers, the battle quickly escalated into an all-out war. The tides of battle had shifted once again, and the clash between these mighty forces was fierce. The animal-type beasts and demons attacked the Shadow Soldiers in unison, their combined assault relentless and overwhelming. The Shadow Soldiers braced themselves for the oncoming horde, standing firm as the battle commenced. Jinwoo watched closely, noting that no matter how many times the Shadow Soldiers were destroyed, they simply regenerated and returned to the fight. It was an incredible display of power, one that left Jinwoo in awe. Jinwoo realized that if these had been his own soldiers, he would have run out of mana long ago. The Shadow Monarch, however, seemed to have an endless supply, like a bottomless well of energy fueling his army. Despite the brutal attacks from the demon clans and the animal-type magic creatures pouring out of the gates, the Shadow Soldiers continued to regenerate, their numbers seemingly infinite. The scene raised questions in Jinwoo's mind. The monsters and the Shadow Monarch didn't seem to be allies. The demon clans and beast-type creatures were slaughtering the Shadow Soldiers just as they fought the Silver Soldiers. Was there an internal conflict between the monsters and the Shadow Monarch, or were they not on the same side from the beginning? The battle was fierce and bloody. The battlefield was soon littered with dead bodies, and rivers of blood flowed across the land. The relentless war, ignited by countless soldiers, consumed everything in its path, leaving no living thing untouched by the violence. The battle was nearing its end, with only a few creatures remaining on the blood-soaked battlefield. The Shadow Monarch walked toward one demon, slumped against a rock. Its face was hidden by a helmet, but the Shadow Monarch knew exactly who it was. The two faced each other in silence, but the tension between them was unmistakable. The Shadow Monarch's gaze hardened as he approached the demon, his voice cold and commanding. He questioned the demon's betrayal, demanding answers. The demon, however, laughed heartily, speaking in a language unfamiliar to most, but the Shadow Monarch clearly understood. Without warning, the Shadow Monarch reached out and gripped the demon by its neck, lifting it effortlessly. The demon choked, its armor crumbling under the force of the Monarch's grip. Still, the demon seemed determined to deliver its final message, despite the crushing pain. pain. Blood spilled from its mouth, and its body went limp as the Shadow Monarch's thumb dug deeper into its throat. But something happened as Jinwoo, observing through the Monarch's eyes, made contact with the demon's gaze. His heart pounded as he recognized those eyes he had encountered before. Shocked, the Shadow Monarch released the demon's lifeless body, which hit the ground with a heavy thud. Jinwoo could hardly believe what he was seeing. His heartbeat quickened as he removed the demon's helmet with trembling hands. The helmet clattered to the ground, revealing a face filled with burning hatred, the same face he had seen at the top of the demon's castle. It was Baran, the Demon King. As Jinwoo realized who the demon was, another shocking revelation hit him. His body, his hands, feet, legs, and chest was completely covered in black armor. At some point, Jinwoo had taken control of the Shadow Monarch's body without even realizing it. His heart began to race, the pounding echoing loudly in his ears. He instinctively placed a hand on his chest, feeling the intense rhythm. But then, something strange caught his attention. His hand moved to the right side of his chest, where he felt another heartbeat. Two hearts, both beating in unison. He had become more aware of his heartbeat ever since the events of the double dungeon, yet he had failed to notice this strange detail until now. As the realization settled in, Jinwoo's gaze dropped to the ground, his mind swirling with confusion. But before he could process it all, his gaze shifted as he noticed something else. 4 large shadows approached from above, growing bigger with each passing second. Quickly, he lifted his head toward the sky. Descending slowly toward him were 4 angels, each with 6 wings. Their presence loomed ominously over him. And then the memory ended. A soft chime echoed around him, and Jinwoo found himself once again surrounded by darkness. As he began to drift into unconsciousness, the familiar voice of the system rang out clearly. Data retrieval is complete. The elite squad of hunters from the Hunters Guild, led by Jongin and Jim Chul, arrived at the entrance of the gate. The massive doorway, resembling that of an ancient castle, loomed before them, exuding an ominous presence. As they approached, a palpable tension filled the air. Sensing the immense power within, Jongin couldn't help but feel uneasy. The overwhelming mana that surrounded the place was unlike anything he had encountered before. Doubt stirred within him as he glanced at Jim Chul, silently questioning the situation. Jim Chul, however, remained certain of his information, knowing that Sung Jinwoo was inside. Among the group, Cha Hae-yin observed the eerie surroundings. The mana permeating the area was foreign to her senses. It didn't belong to Jinwoo. Her curiosity grew as she considered the possibility of another force at play. Thoughts of a double dungeon surfaced in her mind. This would be her chance to confirm the rumors, and her sense of debt to Jinwoo pushed her forward. Meanwhile, Jim Chul's mind drifted to a previous conversation with Jinwoo. Jinwoo had once told him that he wasn't responsible for clearing the double dungeon before. The question of why Jinwoo had returned to this dangerous place gnawed at Jim Chul's thoughts, fueling his suspicion that this wasn't just a coincidence. Determined, the group pressed forward through the gate. Inside, they were met with a sight beyond comprehension. The vast room was filled with debris. Broken stone statues littered the floor. Rubble piled high around them, marking the remnants of a violent battle. Jongin, wide-eyed, struggled to comprehend the scene before him. The devastation was overwhelming. Other hunters among the group stared in disbelief. The legendary statues of God, once thought to be mere myths, had existed in this very place. As the hunters entered the vast chamber, a booming voice echoed around them. The architect stood tall, his gaze sweeping over the group. His grin twisted with dark amusement as he spoke, acknowledging their presence with a tone filled with malice. The hunters, startled, couldn't believe what they were hearing. A monster speaking their language. With a finger raised to his lips, the architect demanded silence. He spoke of the king, warning them not to disturb the one who was resting. Jinwoo stood silently, almost as if he were in a deep sleep. He was frozen in place, unaware of his surroundings. Myung-chul recognized Jinwoo instantly from a distance, but before he could say anything further, a sudden brutal attack struck him and 2 other hunters. In a single swift motion, the architect's power split 2 hunters in half. While Myung-chul was gravely wounded, blood sprang across the room. Hae-in's eyes widened in panic as the situation spiraled out of control. The architect stepped forward, his voice cold and menacing, declaring that these strong humans would be the perfect first offerings to the king. Myung-chul lay on the ground, blood pouring from his mouth. Young-in's voice rang out in desperation as he ordered the others to heal him immediately. The healers scrambled, pouring all their power into saving him while the wounded were moved to safety. Myung-chul's condition was critical, but the the healers worked quickly, trying to stop the bleeding. The statues, thought to be damaged, rose once again, their cold, emotionless faces making them appear even more grotesque. The architect's voice echoed, taunting the hunters. He promised that anyone who survived would have the honor of witnessing the birth of the king. His words sent a shiver through the group, but there was no time to dwell on it. As the architect finished speaking, a red laser shot across the room. Yongin screamed a warning just in time. The hunters ducked, narrowly avoiding the deadly beam. The colossal figure that had fired the attack stood looming, but Yongin was already prepared. He unleashed a powerful fire spell, engulfing the colossus in flames. The explosion rocked the chamber, momentarily distracting the enemy. Jongin seized the opportunity, shouting for the others to destroy the statues. Jimchul, seeing the advancing statues, leaped up, winding his fist for a powerful punch. His specially crafted gauntlet slammed into one of the stone figures with a thundering blow, but the statue didn't crumble as expected. It was far sturdier than he had imagined. Surprised, Jimchul barely had time to react before an explosion sent him flying to the side. It was Jongin again, using his immense power to keep the battle going, determined to bring down the towering enemies. Jongin realized that the enemies they faced had high resistance to physical attacks. His initial attack, a powerful explosion of fire, had no effect as the flames washed over the statue without even causing it to flinch. It became clear to Jongin that these creatures might also have a strong resistance to spells. Sun Cahoon, one of the hunters, struggled with his taunt skills, which failed to attract the attention of the statues. Meanwhile, Cha Hae-in's psychokinetic spells had no impact as the statues remained completely unbothered by her efforts. Jongin quickly assessed the situation, realizing they might be running out of options. His gaze narrowed, searching for Sung Jinwoo. Jongin knew that waking Jinwoo could be the key to turning the tide of the battle. Whatever force had caused Jinwoo to remain unconscious needed to be broken, and Jongin decided to take drastic action. He shot a fireball through the air, knowing it wouldn't hurt Jinwoo, but hoping it might be enough to wake him from whatever state he was trapped in. Just before it could hit Jinwoo, the architect suddenly intervened, stepping in front of the projectile. The fireball exploded against the architect's torso, causing no visible damage. But for the first time, the architect showed anger, causing its face to twist. The architect bared its teeth, enraged that the hunters had dared to interrupt the king's slumber. The architect strode forward, sword raised, aiming to strike down Jongin. But before the attack could land, 3 hunters rushed past Jongin, blocking the architect's assault with sheer force. The clash sent shockwaves through the battlefield, but the hunters managed to hold their ground against the powerful foe. One of the hunters called out to Cha Hae-in, urging her to wake Jinwoo. Understanding the urgency, Hae-in dashed toward Jinwoo, who still stood motionless as if asleep. But before she could reach him, the architect stepped in her path, blocking her way. The architect seemed amused by her determination, taunting her to push beyond her limits. In response, Hae-in unleashed her powerful skill, Sword Dance. She moved swiftly, her blade slicing through the air toward the architect, but he easily blocked her attacks, his laughter echoing through the room. Hae-in, struggling to keep up with his speed, was caught off guard. The architect struck her, slicing through her arm. Blood dripped down as she fell to her knees, wounded. The architect sneered, unimpressed. He declared that everything was going according to his design, mocking the humans for their futile attempts. The system, he boasted, was built to predict and respond to every possible outcome. No matter what they did, the architect believed they couldn't break through his creations with such weak efforts. To him, it was all predictable and ultimately boring. Jongin, realizing there was no other option, shouted that they needed to wake Sung Jinwoo. Hae-in, despite her injured arm, launched herself forward once more, determined to reach Jinwoo, but the architect was quick to act. He extended his arm, attempting to grab her, then swung his sword with incredible force. The sword missed, but it struck the ground, sending tremors through the area, scattering debris everywhere. The architect, grinning widely, seemed impressed that Hae-in had dodged his attack. However, he suddenly flinched, stepping back as he noticed something unexpected. A shadow soldier had been hiding within Hae-in's own shadow. Although it couldn't fully manifest due to the dungeon's rules, its presence was undeniable. The architect was intrigued, questioning how the shadow had been implanted in her. He demanded to know her connection to Sung Jinwoo. Gasping for breath, Hae-in responded, explaining that she was Jinwoo's friend and had come to rescue him. The architect, amused by her determination, offered her a grim opportunity. He declared that one of the greatest monarchs would descend in this world today, and she could witness the event. However, there was a chilling price. Every single one of her companions would die before it happened. A sudden voice interrupted the architect's speech. Not today. Bam! Before the architect could react, a powerful punch landed squarely on its face. The force sent the statue flying into a distant wall, shattering it on impact and scattering debris everywhere. Jinwoo demanded answers. His voice was filled with rage and confusion as he looked down at the fallen figure. Feeling the unfamiliar surge of power within him, he asked, "What have you done to my body?" Sung Jinwoo had awakened and his eyes burned with intensity. Jim Chul and Cha Hai-in stood frozen in shock while Jonggin, relieved, watched the scene unfold. Jinwoo approached the fallen architect, stepping on its face with a firm grip, pressing down with unyielding strength. The architect howled in disbelief, questioning Jinwoo's identity. It couldn't understand why he was there instead of the king, or how he had managed to regain consciousness despite the Black Heart's influence. Jinwoo looked down at the defeated figure, his mind racing at the mention of the Black Heart. His heart pounded in his chest as he pieced together the source of his extraordinary mana. The overwhelming power coursing through him, far beyond anything he'd experienced before, was linked to this heart. Suddenly, a notification appeared in front of Jinwoo, reminding him of his past battle against Baran, the king of demons. The immense power had recognized him as its new owner. The number flashed before his eyes: 100,000 mana energy and a title, the Demon Hunter. Sung Jinwoo observed the architect closely, his sharp intuition revealing two undeniable truths. The mysterious Black Heart had nothing to do with the architect, and it certainly wasn't created for Jinwoo's benefit. Even with the data he had retrieved, it was clear that not all answers had been provided. Some vital information remained hidden. As Jinwoo pressed the architect for answers, his mind raced with questions. The architect had once opposed his selection as the player, but what did that truly mean? What had been planned for him all along? Enraged by Jinwoo's actions and relentless inquiries, the architect reminded him that the consequences of his actions would not go unnoticed, that the other monarchs would never allow this to happen. With no patience left, Jinwoo summoned every dagger from his inventory. The air crackled with energy as his foot pressed down on the architect, while the daggers, pulsing with mana, hovered ominously above. Jinwoo demanded answers, his gaze cold and unforgiving. The architect, despite its dire situation, chuckled darkly, hinting at a greater reason behind Jinwoo's selection. But before more could be revealed, chaos erupted. The other hunters in the lair began to scream, drawing Jinwoo's attention. The colossal statues, once still and retreating into a corner, had started moving again, their eyes glowing a menacing red as they advanced. The architect felt confident, almost smug, as it taunted Sung Jinwoo, knowing that its puppets would continue to attack if it were killed. It issued a challenge, daring Jinwoo to act, but instead of hesitating, Jinwoo smiled. He wasn't intimidated by the architect's threats. Jinwoo, aware of the game the architect was playing, pushed back with a bold thought. He didn't just plan to defeat the architect, he would take down the puppets afterward. The architect, caught off guard, quickly scrambled to respond, but Jinwoo was already ahead, pointing out that even if the architect died, the system itself wouldn't collapse. Jinwoo had seen through the architect's bluff, fully aware of the gaps and lies in what it had said. The architect had underestimated him, forgetting why it had chosen him in the first place. Jinwoo had a talent for breaking the rules. Suddenly, the system pinged repeatedly, but it was failing. Jinwoo had forced the architect into a corner, and the notifications that followed confirmed its desperation. Access denied, over and over again. The architect froze, its attempt to manipulate the system rejected outright. Sung Jinwoo stood unwavering, his thoughts cold and calculated. He had realized that the system and he were intertwined, bound together in a way that couldn't be easily severed. If the system had made him someone's avatar, he would use it in ways they never expected. With a chilling gaze, Jinwoo decided to devour the entire system, its design no longer flawless in his eyes. As he made this declaration, his blade tore through the architect's body. Shards of flesh and metal explode around him. Red and green energy lashes out, tearing through every defense. The architect's mangled form convulses, its last attempts at survival shattered as Jinwoo carves deeper, leaving nothing but ruin in his wake. The architect's face split in two, stumbled through its last moments. It uttered its final words, a grim prophecy about the future. When the pillars of fire that hold the heavens are raised, an inevitable death will approach you. Its voice faltered as its body cracked, crumbled, and finally collapsed. Jinwoo, with a steely glint in his eyes and a cold smirk, simply responded, "As you please." The members of the Bravery Guild stood outside the gate, waiting impatiently. It had been about an hour since the Hunters Guild had entered, and tension was rising. They wondered what was taking so long, realizing that if their guild had gone in, they might not have made it out at all. When the first hunters began emerging, battered and bruised, it became clear that whatever had happened inside was far beyond anyone's expectations. The Bravery Guild members were shocked to see even the elites of the Hunters Guild in such a state. They couldn't fathom how such destruction had occurred in what was supposed to be a C-rank dungeon. Jinwoo approached the Bravery Guild members, asking for their help in moving the bodies of the deceased. Stunned, they quickly agreed, though the weight of the tragedy was beginning to sink in. The sheer number of fallen hunters was overwhelming. Jinwoo stepped out of the gate, deep in thought. The system architect was gone, but many of his questions remained unanswered. He reflected on the events that had unfolded, standing in silence as Jinwoo approached him. Around 20 top-ranked hunters had died, and if this had been a dungeon break, the damage would have been unimaginable. Jinwoo acknowledged the immense tragedy, explaining that he had called for the Hunters Guild's cooperation when the magic energy leaking from the dungeon had become too intense. Jinwoo quietly listened as Jinwoo expressed his regret. He hadn't expected the situation to escalate to this level, but the casualties were undeniable. Jinwoo in turn reflected that he had only survived thanks to the help of the Hunters Guild and the monitoring division. Despite the devastation, he knew he had done everything he could to prevent even greater losses. Jinwoo was puzzled about how Jinwoo had known to find the double dungeon within that specific gate. Jinwoo explained that the dungeon itself had summoned him, drawing him there through a message only visible in his mind. Jinwoo couldn't fully grasp the idea, but seeing the casualties and the seriousness of the situation, he knew Jinwoo wasn't joking. Jinwoo remained an enigma to him, someone difficult to read. Meanwhile, Cha Hae-in approached Jinwoo, concerned about his well-being. Jinwoo reassured her that he was fine, though he admitted he was feeling a bit weary. Suddenly, his exhaustion overtook him. Without warning, Jinwoo faltered and collapsed to the ground. The hunters around him cried out in alarm, rushing to his side as they called out his name, desperately trying to rouse him. At the Hunter Association in Korea, a meeting was held between Go Gun-hee, the president of the Korean Hunter Association, and Matsumoto, the chairman of the Hunter Association in Japan. He was accompanied by Hanekawa, an interpreter. Matsumoto slid a document across the table, presenting a surprising proposal. The contract offered to relinquish Japan's claim to all the Essence Stones on Jeju Island in exchange for something unexpected. They wanted to hire Sung Jinwoo. Gun-hee was taken aback by the offer and questioned why they would give up such valuable resources, especially since Sung Jinwoo was not affiliated with the Hunter Association. Matsumoto acknowledged this but explained that they wanted the opportunity to negotiate with him, admitting that Japan had been unable to contact Jinwoo and needed Korea's help. Matsumoto wasn't asking for a recommendation, just a chance to meet Jinwoo. As Gun-hee considered the offer, he couldn't believe the lengths Japan was willing to go just for a conversation with Jinwoo. The sheer amount of money they were offering spoke volumes. He speculated that Japan's desperation might stem from their inability to handle the newly spawned S-rank gate in Tokyo, now that Goto Ryuji was gone. Sung Jinwoo's record of accomplishments certainly made the offer tempting. Gun-hee, however, had something else in mind. He tapped on the contract, indicating he wanted to discuss the matter without the interpreter present. Matsumoto was surprised by the request and asked how Gun-hee understood Japanese. Gun-hee explained that his father had run a small business in Japan when he was young, leaving Hanekawa to stand quietly by the door. Gun-hee remained composed as he addressed Matsumoto, warning him to abandon any crafty schemes. He had heard rumors that the Blade Guild had severed ties with Matsumoto, and this revelation seemed to strike a nerve. Matsumoto, visibly enraged, stood up, shocked that Gun-hee knew about the internal situation. Gun-hee, calm and unbothered, explained how it was obvious. He had noticed that the Blade Guild rejected funding from the Japanese Hunters Association and instead relied solely on government subsidies. The Blade Guild, once completely under the control of the Japanese Hunters Association due to Goto Ryuji's influence, had now broken free. With Goto gone, the once powerful guild was falling apart, leading to a power struggle within the association. Gun-hee pointed out that Matsumoto's control over the situation was slipping. Gun-hee pressed further, reminding Matsumoto that if the newly spawned gate in Tokyo wasn't properly handled, he would bear full responsibility. As Gun-hee took out a camera, his voice grew firmer, his eyes filled with a quiet rage. He acknowledged that while Goto Ryuji may have had malicious intentions, he was still a hunter who represented Japan. Now, with Goto's death, the downfall of the Blade Guild, the growing conflicts between Japanese guilds, and the lives that had been lost due to Matsumoto's schemes, everything was collapsing around him. Gunhee made it clear that all of this would fall squarely on Matsumoto's shoulders, leaving him with the weight of his actions. Matsumoto was left stunned as Gunhee revealed a camera that had been connected to Matsumoto's receiver. It belonged to Goto's team, and Gunhee's sharp gaze burned with fury as he spoke. His teeth clenched, questioned whether Matsumoto had truly believed he wouldn't discover the scheme. Matsumoto, terrified at being caught, began to sweat as fear overtook him. He was at a loss, knowing that the truth was now out in the open. Gunhee, undeterred, reminded Matsumoto that this was no time to be negotiating over mana crystals. If the information about Matsumoto's crooked schemes became public, the consequences would fall heavily on the people of Japan. With controlled rage, Gunhee crushed the camera in his fist and slammed the table, shattering it into pieces. The sound echoed in the room as Matsumoto's fear deepened, his eyes widening in shock. But then, Gunhee's tone shifted. He told Matsumoto that he wasn't so heartless as to unleash such devastation. He wouldn't allow an entire country, no, all of Asia, to be thrown into chaos because of one man's deceit. However, Matsumoto had someone to thank for Gunhee's restraint. If not for Sung Jinwoo, the outcome could have been much worse. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching!